local plan? How are we consulting and addressing frequently asked questions in relation to the strategy, sites, themes in the local plan? And we will also have an opportunity for you to ask questions of us as well. I'll now ask the presenters to introduce themselves, and presenters will speak in turn. Thank you. I'll hand over to Max.
Thanks, Heather. So just to introduce myself, I'm Max Laverack. I am one of the team leaders in the policy and strategy team at Greater Cambridge Shared Planning. Over to Stuart.
Thanks, Max. I'm Stuart Morris. I'm a team leader in the planning policy team alongside Max and Terry. And I'll pass over to Terry.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm Terry D'Souza. So yeah, I'm a team leader as well in the planning policy and strategy team. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you. Thanks. So I'll hand over to Stuart. I think, Stuart, you're going to start us off.
Yes, I was just going to talk attendees through the question and answer function. So you may have noticed, but you are not able to see each other as attendees, and you're not able to speak. But we have enabled the question and answer function on Teams. Now, this hopefully is in the top bar that you can see at the top of your screen. If it's not, then you can see that below that number 2, there's a ... and more. And if you click on that, you should see the question and answer function. When you click on that, you'll see the right-hand bar pop up, and you can click on Ask a Question. Type that question in the box and then click on Ask, and we'll be able to see that, and we'll post it and talk you through it. I would, if you're willing, so we will be doing a bit of a presentation at the start, as Heather has talked about. If you're willing to give that a go early on, maybe even now, and maybe posting a test, or even your early questions, it'd be really great to make sure that you're comfortable with that and it's working and we can see it, and that will enable your involvement in the session later on. As Heather noted, in terms of the structure, towards the end of the presentation, we'll be talking through frequently asked questions. So we really want to be able to address the questions that are in your mind. So if you want to post right through the presentation, anything that you've got, and we'll try and pick those up in a good order. We'll also provide the opportunity to post those questions at the time as well. I can see there is a hand raised, so we're not able to turn on the kind of speaking function. So as we are trying to use that question and answer function, would really welcome you're trying to use that either via, say, the Q&A at the top, or if you can't see that more, the more icon.
I'm just thinking, Stuart, given that nobody's been able to post anything in the Q&A so far, I wonder if there's a way that we could see if it's working, because sometimes Teams does play up a little bit. I don't know. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Is everybody able to sort of raise their hands if the Q&A function isn't working? And in that way, we can maybe see if there's another way we could do it. Okay, so a second hand has gone up. So I'm assuming, Stuart, that we're not able to use the Q&A at the moment.
Okay. So just to say, so I have enabled the chat for now. So if you maybe while we go through the presentation, if you wanted to post what's not working in the chat, we can try and help you. And if by the time we get to the kind of questions moment, we can. It's kind of an easier, more structured way to use the questions, but we may be able to use the chat for questions if it all goes horribly wrong. So yeah, go for it, Max.
I was just saying it does seem to be working.
Okay, well, I suggest we get going with the presentations, but yeah, do post your questions. If you're struggling with it, we can try and help you in the chat while we go through. If you do get through to the question and answers, please do start writing what your questions are that you want to share. Over to you, Max, I think.
You're on mute, Max. Sorry.
Apologies. There's a lot of things going on. It's quite hard to manage these webinars, isn't it? So thanks very much, Stuart. So yeah, I'm going to take us through a few slides which kind of help to set the scene for the consultation. So start off, because I appreciate we probably have quite a diverse range of people in attendance today, with just a little bit of background actually about what a local plan is, because possibly not everybody will be fully aware of it. So every local planning authority in England is required to prepare a local plan for the future development of their area. Local plans do a variety of different things. So sort of first and foremost, they identify and address strategic priorities for the development of an area. They identify the needs for different things. So that might be for the number of homes for the area, the jobs that we would wish to deliver over the plan period, but also things like infrastructure, for example, the infrastructure that would be needed to support development. Critically, they also allocate sites to actually meet those needs. That's how we as a local planning authority demonstrate that we can actually meet the needs that we've identified. And critically as well, include other policies to guide development and support planning application decisions. So when you submit a planning application, the first thing that an officer would look at when they're considering that application would be all of the different policies in the local plan. Now, the government requires us to review the local plan every 5 years and update it as necessary. That is a legal requirement. And also to meet our assessed needs. And I think particularly for housing, so it's worth emphasising there's been quite a significant shift in government policy over the last 12 months. And there's now a much stronger emphasis on local authorities planning to meet their housing needs. Now, Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, back in 2019, after the adoption of their respective local plans, which are still in force at the moment, agreed that going forward, as we had joined together as a joint service across the two local authorities, agreed that they were going to produce a joint local plan for the whole of Greater Cambridge. So that was resolved back in 2019. I'll say a little bit more about the journey we've been on to get to now in a second. But I think one of the key things really just to sort of emphasise is that one of the main things, or one of the key things that's really driving the timeframes that we're working towards for this local plan, is that national government has set a clear expectation that council should update their local plans and submit these for examination by December 2026. So that's obviously the end of this year. So it's not a huge amount of time off. And we're working hard towards meeting that deadline. So I'd mentioned this before, but obviously we've been on a journey with this local plan. So following the resolution back in 2019 to start preparing the plan, we moved pretty swiftly in 2020 to a consultation. It was called the First Conversation, and that really was an initial discussion really with the area to gather views on what the key issues were that were facing the area and the approaches that could be taken to address those. Following that, in November 2021, we had the first proposals consultation. So that proposed our preferred options for the level of development needs, the allocations we would need to make to meet those needs, and the policies which would guide the consideration of planning applications. And at that stage, we were very much sort of seeking views on those options to guide us in formulating our preferred draft local plan. So from 2023 through to 2025, various different reports were prepared, updates made to the development strategy, and we also published a new local plan timetable, which was considered by members. So there's been sort of a lot of ongoing work throughout that period to continue to develop, finesse the plan, much of that in response to the feedback that was received back in 2021. And that's led us to now. So we're now pretty much halfway through the consultation, and probably now in the second half of the consultation period, which is due to end on the 30th of January. So we've got a range of things out for consultation, the local plan and other supporting materials. Terry will say a little bit more, I think, in a few moments about sort of what forms the package for the consultation. But just to say as well, we are still on our journey. We following this consultation will be considering all of the feedback that's been received, undertaking further development of our evidence base with a view to preparing a final draft proposed submission local plan, which we'll be consulting on again later this year in the summer, before that sort of December 2026 deadline for the submission to the Secretary of State for examination, and then thereafter the examination of the local plan. So just to say, this has very much been a journey. This is the continuation of a journey. The plan that we've prepared is very much anchored in our ambitious vision for Greater Cambridge, really, and the objectives that sort of stem from that vision. This will probably be quite familiar to those of you who've been following the progress of the local plan, because I think it's very much anchored in what was prepared for the first proposals back in 2021. But I guess the key thing to emphasise here is that we want Greater Cambridge to be a place where impacts on climate and the environment are significantly reduced. We need to balance that against our economy. We have a flourishing, internationally recognised and significant economy in this area, and we need to continue to support that through the local plan. But we want that to also deliver a genuine increase in the quality of everyday life for all our communities as well. And we want those benefits to be spread out across the area and to be seen in all communities. So in order to sort of deliver that, what we're saying is that developments have to minimise carbon emissions and reliance on private vehicles, create thriving neighbourhoods, provide the jobs and homes and the supporting infrastructure that's needed, increase our network of nature, wildlife and multifunctional green spaces, and there's been a substantial amount of work done on sort of green infrastructure and how we can deliver improved green infrastructure across the area. And also, really importantly, always recognising that we do have a really unique, locally distinctive heritage, and also landscapes in the wider Greater Cambridge area that we need to continue to safeguard and protect. And you'll recognise, some of you might recognise the tree diagram. This has been a stalwart throughout the local plan's development, and we think it's a really neat way of setting out the sort of core themes and topics that the local plan deals with. So that being climate change, biodiversity and green spaces, wellbeing and social inclusion, great places, delivered for our homes, jobs and infrastructure. And you'll see that reflected in the chapters of the local plan that we've published for consultation. I'm now going to hand over to Terry to say a little bit more about how we're consulting and what we're consulting on.
Thank you, Max. That's great. Thank you. So on the next slide, so I think mine's just catching up. Yeah, thank you. So we are consulting on the draft local plan. So that contains all of the emerging policies, which cover everything from flooding, affordable housing, design, all of the kind of things you'd expect, and as well as our emerging site allocations. And there's probably around 70 sites and around 60 odd policies. So there's quite a lot within the local plan to kind of to look through. We also have the policies map, and the policies map basically outlines all of the designations across Greater Cambridge. So that includes the sites, but it also includes other designations such as Greenbelt. It shows the conservation areas. It shows the kind of extents of all of the villages across South Cambs. So there's a lot on the policies map, and we actually have an interactive one as well, which is quite helpful because you can kind of zoom in and toggle on and off some of the layers. So it's quite helpful to look at. We also have a draft sustainability appraisal and a habitats regulation assessment. Now, those are kind of documents that we're required to do by national planning policy, and they basically assess all of our emerging sites and our emerging policies, and they consider their social, environmental, and economic impacts, and they also look at what other alternatives we could have used instead of what we've got in the draft plan itself, and they kind of compare them side by side. So that's an interesting piece of work to look at. I think if you're looking at the draft local plan, and what I've been saying to people at various events is, the draft local plan is a really good place to start, because obviously it sets out the policies and the sites. If you want to look at the next level of detail, I would strongly recommend you look at the topic papers. The topic papers are set out by theme. So from the tree diagram, you've got the 7 themes, but you've also got one for the strategy, and you've got one for all of the sites. And that sets out in a bit more detail about how we've actually come to the position that we have with the plan. So what evidence have we used to inform those policies and those sites, what some of the consultation feedback was from the last round of consultation. Sometimes it outlines what further work we think we need to do to develop those policies or those sites further. So they're a really good place to go next if you want to find out a little bit more information about the background of those sites and of those policies. We then have the statement of consultation, and that sets out all of the things that we did in the first proposals consultation in 2021 and how we've responded to the previous comments we received during that consultation. And then we've got what's called the duty to cooperate statement of compliance and the draft statement of common ground. And those are quite sort of technical documents setting out how we've been engaging with other public bodies on kind of strategic cross-boundary matters. So that's working, how we've been working with the county council, for example, how I've been working with our neighbouring planning authorities like Huntingdonshire. And then at the bottom, it kind of falls off the bottom of the list, really. But what we have there is a huge suite of background documents and evidence. As you can imagine, a draft local plan has a lot of information that sits behind it. Every single percentage, if it's affordable housing or biodiversity net gain, everything needs to be tested. It needs to be justified in order for us to demonstrate that it's required and that it's sound. So there are a lot of background documents and evidence. But as I said, I think before you kind of dive down into the evidence, I would strongly look at the topic papers. Strongly recommend looking at the topic papers in the first instance. In terms of the approach to the consultation, so the consultation has been running since the 1st of December, and it concludes at the end of this month on the 30th of January. What we're trying to do is really provide a kind of a clear narrative on the plan. As I kind of said, the plan itself is good sort of 700 odd pages. There's a lot of background documents, so we're really trying to be clear in terms of the messaging, with what the plan's seeking to do, being really clear and transparent on the numbers, whether it's for the overall number of homes and jobs we're looking to deliver, or whether it's specific sites, and really like setting out quite clearly why we're producing the plan and what the kind of overall aim and vision and purpose of those policies are as well. We're also trying to be really clear, and hopefully we are, about why we've chosen certain options over other alternatives. Some people say, well, not sure you've got this right. Have you looked at this or have you looked at that? And hopefully within the plan and within those topic papers, it's really clear as to why we've chosen some options over others. We've also been looking at a wide range of engagement tools, methods, different platforms. So as you're here tonight, online events. We've had a number of in-person events, drop-in events, leafleting outside train stations, supermarkets. I've been to a number of Christmas markets in the run-up to Christmas, and evening of events, really trying to maximise I suppose awareness. It's not just about participation, but I think it's also about awareness as well. So that's something we've been trying to do, but obviously relying on the public as well to spread the word as much as possible. In terms of the online events, you can actually go back and watch the previous ones if you wish. So we did an introduction to the draft plan when the consultation launched. We then did a session on the development strategy and the site allocations, and then I think it was later in December, we did a session on the themes, on the 7 themes, and then this is the 4th session of the kind of online events. And this is just a QR code and web link to the local plan website itself, but I'm pretty sure that we've got this further along in the slide deck, so we can bring this up again at the end. So just in terms of how you kind of navigate the website, because sometimes it's not always clear to everybody. Once you come onto the local plan website, it will look like this. and essentially there were kind of four main kind of things that I kind of wanted to point out here. So the first bit is highlighted by the top arrow. Is how you actually can read the plan itself. It's a digital plan, so you don't have to scroll through a PDF. We can if you want, but it's a digital plan, so you can jump between the relevant sections that you want to look at. And then you can actually add your comments to those specific sections. So if you wanted to make a comment on, say, I don't know, our biodiversity policy, you can jump straight to the biodiversity policy and you can make a comment below it. That is a probably one of the easiest ways to make your comments. So I'd strongly recommend that people kind of go down that route. You can also, in the link below, then find some of the background documents. So that will be where the topic papers are found, the sustainability appraisal, and all of the evidence-based documents that I mentioned earlier. Further down, which is the third of the green arrows, you have a link to the interactive draft policies map, which I mentioned earlier. And then we also, at the just below that, we have what's called a story map. It's essentially a bit of a kind of interactive web page, and it gives you a nice kind of high-level summary of what the local plan is seeking to do, and breaks down all of the chapters into a kind of short summary. So again, if you don't want to go too much into the detail and you just want to keep it quite high level in the first instance, it might be worth having a look at the story map just to see what the plan is saying and doing. And we're also seeking to engage with younger people as well. So we're actually running a Lego competition at the moment. So if you know of anybody 18 and under who is interested in submitting a Lego entry, I would strongly suggest you do so. So it'd be great if you could spread the word. But not necessarily for young people, for everybody. We're also doing a drawing competition as well. And actually, the chosen winners will actually have their images put into the plan itself. Because as much as planning is unbelievably important in terms of people's lives, it sometimes younger people and people that are not typically involved in planning just don't know about these things. So we're trying our best to try and engage such as wide a range of people as possible. So we're going to move on to the next part of the presentation now, and this is basically us. We're going to go through and address some of the issues that have been raised during the consultation so far. So this is a bit of a mixture of some of the things that have been posted in previous online chats, as well as some of the feedback that we've had from in-person events as well. So I'm going to start off talking about the kind of the plan as a whole. So some of the questions that have come back is, how does the consultation feedback actually influence the plan? I think sometimes there's a perception that well, this is it, the plan's done, it doesn't matter what people say or think because it's too late, all the decisions have been made. That's absolutely not the case. This is a draft plan, it's out for consultation for 8 weeks. We're really keen and interested to understand what people think about the plan, so the feedback is really important. So it helps us to understand what are the big issues and the big priorities that people have. So, are we doing things right in terms of tackling the climate emergency, for example? Are we putting development in the right places? But also we get to understand some of the detail points around the sites and around the policies. So it's really important that people feedback during the consultation, because otherwise we just do not know what everybody thinks. We're also keen to hear what people's suggestions are as well about how we can improve the plan moving forward. And actually sometimes some of the comments, the thoughts, the suggestions, they actually help us to scope evidence as well that we need to undertake to get us to the next stage of consultation. So for example, people might say, well, actually in this area there's this particular issue, have you looked into this? Well, that helps us because it helps us understand local issues, local problems, local concerns, and then we can then try and address that as we seek to move the plan forward. So it's really important that people engage and share all of that knowledge with us. Another question was about what happens next. So Max has slightly touched on this already. So essentially what we do is we review all of the comments, all of the feedback that we get from the consultation. And where we need to, we may undertake new or refresh existing evidence. And then we will seek to publish the next version of the plan. The technical term is the Regulation 19 version of the plan. And we will publish that in summer this year. And then when that consultation concludes, we will then submit all of those comments and the plan to the Planning Inspectorate, who will then start the process of setting up the examination in public for the plan. Now, we have to submit that plan, as Max has said already, we have to submit the plan and all the evidence and the public comments by the end of this calendar year. And then the examination will then follow in due course. And then another question that's come up a few times is about what does the local plan mean for neighbourhood plans in the area? So we have a number of neighbourhood plans that have been developed by parishes across South Cambridgeshire and South Newnham in the city. So essentially, for those of you that don't know, neighbourhood plans, they form part of the development plan for an area. So for example, if a planning application came in for a particular parish that had a neighbourhood plan, that application will be determined against the local plan policies as well as the policies in that neighbourhood plan. Now, the neighbourhood plan would still remain in force as this local plan progresses, and once the local plan is hopefully adopted, probably around 2028. Now, national policy requires neighbourhood plans to be in general conformity with the local plan, so they can't be at odds with each other. So it may mean that individual policies within the neighbourhood plan may be superseded by a new policy in the local plan. Now, where there's a conflict, national policy basically says that the newer policy, the newer plan would take precedent over any of the existing ones. So there is the potential that, let's say there's a neighbourhood plan that's already in place and it sets a particular requirement for development. The new local plan, if there's a policy covering the same issue, it may kind of supersede that neighbourhood plan policy, but that's not to say that nothing can be done around that. So neighbourhood plans can be updated. There's a couple of ways to do that. If it's a minor amendment, then that can just be done at any time, and the councils will support neighbourhood forums or parish councils in doing that. If it's a more substantial change to a neighbourhood plan, then it would need to go through various stages of public consultation and another examination and a referendum. However, again, the councils will be working with any parishes or neighbourhood forums that want to do that. So there's a really key relationship between local plans and neighbourhood plans, and if anyone has any sort of questions around that, then we'd be happy to support that and help answer those. The last question is about the current National Planning Policy Framework consultation. So for those of you that haven't seen, the government just before Christmas published a consultation on revisions to the National Planning Policy Framework. Now that sets out the planning framework for the whole of England, and the government are looking to make a number of changes to that national system. I think it's fair to say that the councils are still absorbing what those proposed changes are, and we are trying to at the moment understand what the implications may be for this emerging local plan. So that's both in terms of the work that we may need to do, but also how the councils will actually respond to that government consultation as well. So it's still very fresh. We're still looking at all of the details and trying to get behind that. But it's very much on our radar at the moment, and the councils will be responding in due course. I think I'm now handing over to Stuart. Thank you.
You're actually
I think it's Max, actually.
Yes, you're handing over to me, but that's totally fine. Thank you. So yeah, I'm gonna answer a few of the most frequently asked questions we've had in relation to the development strategy. So the first one that I think inevitably this question will come up quite frequently, but why are we planning for so much development? I mean, it's a very good question. I think there's sort of two parts to the answer. So firstly, and I've already kind of hinted actually at this in my earlier segment, but the government actually requires us to plan for this housing figure as a minimum. But secondly, we also think planning for this figure will limit increases in unsustainable commuting into the area, and sort of transport and movement has been a really significant part of how we've developed our strategy. So for a little bit more context on the first point, so national planning policy requires that plans as a minimum should meet the local housing need. I don't even think the version of the NPPF that's up for consultation would change that. Actually, I think that remains consistent. And local housing need is calculated using a standard method. So there's a number that sort of we effectively are provided by government. This is the number that we're planning to meet within the draft plan. Now, sort of on the second point, it's worth saying that Greater Cambridge has a particularly strong economy. We've performed really, really well in recent years. And throughout the plan making process, we've continually sought to really understand the housing figure that would be needed to support the most likely forecast for jobs, because clearly there is a really strong interrelationship with the number of homes you have to build to support the jobs that you're providing. If you don't do that, there's a risk that you increase unsustainable commuting into the area, because those jobs might arrive, but there won't be the homes to actually meet them. So that inevitably has impacts on both carbon emissions and quality. So that those would be quite negative impacts. So our most recent evidence shows that the standard method minimum housing figure, so the figure that the government provides for us, sort of coincidentally, is quite convenient, but it also supports the most likely forecast for jobs. So there's a really strong rationale for that number. And ultimately, that will help to limit further unsustainable commuting into the area. So following that, inevitably, people ask us, well, if that's what you've got to build, how did you decide where those new homes and jobs are going to go? So what we do to sort of work through that is we consider a wide range of alternative strategies, sort of thinking about the pros and the cons of meeting needs in different locations. And there's lots of information about this set out in our strategy topic paper. Terry's obviously helpfully sort of explained how you can find that, and also in the evidence library as well. There's lots of information we've published to sort of explain how we've gone through that process. Now, our development strategy aims to direct development, as I've already hinted at, to where active and public transport is the natural choice, but also where green infrastructure, including parks and other green spaces, as well as spaces for wildlife, can be delivered alongside new development, because green infrastructure and nature has been sort of a big priority for the local plan. But also where jobs, services and facilities can be located near to where people live. So people have those facilities nearby. We've sought to make the most of brownfield land throughout the process. We're required to do so by national planning policy, and also to use all of the land we have identified as efficiently as possible by looking at sort of the densities and what we could reasonably accommodate on those sites. So we've applied the following order of preference to identify our development needs, reflecting the sustainability of different locations to accommodate the development. So firstly, we naturally look at sites that fall within the urban area of Cambridge, because that is the most sustainable location in Greater Cambridge at which you can situate development. It has the most number of services, it's served by the highest quality public transport. It's where a lot of the jobs are as well. The second sort of location we look at once we've sort of exhausted all of the sites we can bring forward there, sites on the edge of Cambridge, but obviously taking into account the impact on the Greenbelt purposes. So Cambridge has a Greenbelt. The Greenbelt is a nationally defined policy, but locally defined in terms of the boundaries. It's there to prevent sprawl, to stop towns from merging with each other, to preserve the historic setting of historic towns. The purposes are all set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, so we have to assess what impact development in those locations would have before we could recommend those sites potentially coming forward for development being allocated in the local plan. And obviously, as Cambridge is surrounded by the Greenbelt, that is a pretty significant constraint to growth. So then the next sort of tier down in terms of where we've looked is at Cambourne and other new settlements. So Cambourne is a natural potential opportunity for growth in the area, because the anticipation is there'll be some major transport improvements in the area in the forthcoming years, the arrival of the East West Rail Station, the high quality public transport corridor that's planned to go from Cambridge to Camborne, for example, as well. But we also looked at other opportunities for kind of standalone new settlements that can provide adequate services, jobs, infrastructure to support kind of the formation of new communities. And then finally, in sort of last order, we looked at the rural area, so particularly at the more accessible villages within the rural area. So that's our rural centres and our minor rural centres. So the next question, it kind of links back to sort of the previous one in a way, but a few people have asked us why we've not released more land on the edge of Cambridge in preference to less sustainable locations at Camborne and Grange Farm. So I think it's right to reflect that sort of on a purist basis, new settlements are perhaps less sustainable than sort of building on the edge of Cambridge. But what we've done is we've carefully considered all the reasonable alternatives for meeting our housing and employment needs. And we've compared the benefits and challenges of the sites on the edge of Cambridge against an expanded Camborne and Grange Farm. I think a key point to note here, and I've sort of already alluded to this, is that government attaches great importance to the Greenbelt, and councils can only release land from the Greenbelt if they consider that exceptional circumstances are demonstrated, and there are quite clear tests that are set out in national policy that guide us in making a decision on whether there are those exceptional circumstances. So we recognise that sites on the edge of Cambridge in the Greenbelt are likely to perform better than Camborne or Grange Farm in supporting trips by sustainable modes of transport, for example, and inevitably they're closer to the existing jobs and services. But all site opportunities on the edge of Cambridge in the Greenbelt would also result in high harm to the Greenbelt purposes and could put pressure on Cambridge's infrastructure. So that's sort of a balance that we have to strike. Meanwhile, Camborne and Grange Farm, I should say, have the potential to perform well in transport terms, as well as some of our existing new settlements that were already in development at Northstowe and Waterbeach. They also present pretty unique opportunities. So I've already mentioned Camborne, and the fact that that is the location of the proposed East West Rail Station. It's also an existing growing new town as well, which provides an opportunity to sort of build onto. And Grange Farm is in quite a unique location, really, because it's close to lots of existing and expanding rural business parks and science parks and connected to the biomedical campus as well, and Cambridge by high quality public transport. And it's anticipated that will increase as well over time as a result of the CSET scheme, which is due to introduce another high quality public transport corridor through the area. It's a high jobs growth area, and it actually hasn't seen any substantial housing provision in recent plans. So in summary, given the scale of our needs, the opportunities, the challenges, noting in particular the harm of releasing further land on the edge of Cambridge in the Greenbelt, those opportunities that I've mentioned at Cambridge and Grange Farm, we've effectively reached the conclusion that our general development needs alone don't provide the exceptional circumstances required in national policy to justify removing land from the Greenbelt in the edge of Cambridge in this local plan. Worth saying for the eagle-eyed view out there who've looked at all the policies, there are a couple of circumstances where we have identified very specific reasons to conclude that there may be exceptional circumstances to justify release from the Greenbelt, those being at the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, and the Baberham Research Campus as well. So further review of the site-specific reasons for releasing land in other locations didn't identify those specific circumstances. In case of those sites, it's because of the sort of clustering of the employment opportunities, the very unique internationally recognised value of those sites, and the only means of actually expanding those locations where those unique opportunities exist is to look at the area, the area of land, the areas of land immediately surrounding it, which fall within the green belt. So those ones are quite site specific, but we haven't identified those general exceptional circumstances to look at other sites elsewhere. The final question, planning. So there's obviously a great challenge with providing infrastructure in the area, and we're very reliant on that infrastructure being provided, and it's not being provided directly by the councils. We don't deliver it. So how can we be sure it's going to happen on time and there's going to be enough capacity for dealing with things like sewerage, particularly as the funding was withdrawn for the new Cambridge water treatment works. So delivery of the sites included in the plan, which will contribute to meeting our vision for Greater Cambridge, are clearly very reliant on significant infrastructure, so water supply, water treatment, and also a sustainable and effective transport network. So delivery of this infrastructure is responsibility of a range of local and national partners. And as such, delivery of the plan's vision relies on these partners, reflecting strategy for Greater Cambridge in their own strategies and delivering on these in a timely way. So we're continuing to work really closely with the responsible organisations and also with the government to ensure that they understand the need for these challenges to be resolved in time to support the delivery of the local plan. And in terms of how the local plan's framed, we've been really quite careful to qualify that and sort of reference those external factors in drafting the plan. We'll continue to carefully monitor and consider those against the proposals in the draft local plan. But regardless of the spatial strategy or the site allocations, these would apply to a greater or lesser extent to any emerging local plan in the area. So ultimately it was decided that we need to continue to progress the plan and continue to work with those partners to resolve some of these outstanding matters in the background. We're now going to talk a little bit about sites because we've had inevitably quite a few questions about some of the specific sites we've proposed, and I'm going to start off by talking about North East Cambridge, and I'll
second, Max.
Sorry, yeah, Max, we're just noting the time, and obviously we've got this booked for an hour, which will finish in about 15 minutes. There's quite a lot of questions in the chat, so what we thought we'd do is stop and do those questions first, and then perhaps we can pick up if we get an opportunity at the end. If everybody's happy with that, perhaps you can put your hands up, because I just think that you'd get your questions answered then, which is great. And it looks like we've got the majority of people with their hands up. Great. Okay, so I'm going to take the questions from the top of the chat down, and then I'll call in our officers to respond. So I will read out the question just in case somebody can't access the chat. So there is a question about why do no site maps show public rights of way? Stuart, I think you were going to answer that.
Thanks, Heather. So I guess there's two parts of this. So the sites, the big sites have spatial frameworks, which Terry could talk in more detail about, but there's also the policies map, which is more precisely the illustration of the meaning of the policy wording. And it's true to say that neither on the policies map and I think potentially on the spatial frameworks, neither show public rights of way. It is something that is taken account of in planning applications because it's something held by the county council and it's something that's taken account of separately. It's protected via separate legislation. But I think there is an opportunity for us to review, certainly in terms of the spatial frameworks, whether that could be amended at the later stages.
Yeah, just a supplement. Sorry, just a supplement. Now, I think that's a really good suggestion. We could definitely look to do that for the spatial frameworks for the larger, more complicated sites. So, yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion.
Thanks, Terry. It's really helpful. And it is worth noting, just a reminder, this is Reg 18 status, Regulation 18 status for the local plan. So there will be further opportunities for consultation later on, which we hopefully will have that working. Okay. What proportion of housing suitable for disabled people will be mandatory for developers? That is for social housing, standard housing for all levels of disability, including full-time wheelchair users, and in housing from one-person places to family homes. There's a very severe shortage of housing for all of these nationally. And I think that is Stuart. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Heather. So sections 7 to 9 of policy HSS residential space standards and accessible homes, which I will post in the chat at the moment, addresses this point, and it says that all new build residential units, so that's market and affordable, must be designed to meet a particular standard, which is kind of building regulations M42, so that's accessible and adaptable. Specifically for there's an additional standard, which is M43, wheelchair adaptable 3A and wheelchair accessible dwellings. And there is a requirement in the policy for 20 or more new build dwellings, 10% of the affordable units and 5% of the market unit must be wheelchair user dwellings in accordance with the standards. And that they should be delivered as wheelchair adaptable unless the council has identified a need for wheelchair accessible dwellings. So I will post a link to the chat. Again, this is a consultation, so please do put in your comments if you have views on that proposal.
Thank you, Stuart. Next question. Where should we go to understand the policy for secondary school provision? And I think this is Max.
Yes. Thank you very much. So I guess there's a couple of things to sort of say here. We, as part to sort of inform the local plan, we produce what's called an infrastructure delivery plan, an IDP, which basically seeks to identify, based on the planned growth in the area and the sort of sites that we're intending to allocate, how the need for different sort of infrastructure can be met. And one of the sort of key aspects of that strategy and that document is around school provision. So the IDP is not a bad place to look at in terms of sort of understanding sort of the process we've gone through to identify what school places are actually needed and how those needs will be met. In terms of the plan itself, I'd probably recommend a couple of places, really. So policy WSNC, meeting the needs of new and growing community, sets out a broad approach to how we would deliver a wide range of different infrastructures, community infrastructures and facilities to support the development of new community. So a kind of a broad approach is set out within that policy to sort of how we would assess applications and how we would assess developments in terms of how they would contribute to meeting the needs for various different infrastructures, but also different site allocations where we've identified that particular development will have to provide new school places or potentially wholly new schools. Those have been set out within some of the individual site allocations as well. So I think there's a few different places you can look. Probably the policies are worth a look, but it's probably also worth looking as well at the topic papers for those respective policies as well, because those help to kind of set out the sort of the fuller story and the fuller picture of how we would seek to secure the provision of such facilities. Worth saying that currently schools are not a Greater Cambridge sort of responsibility. They are delivered through the county council, and we work with the county council to plan for the need for new school places and schools to meet the needs that we're planning for in the local plan. So hopefully that addresses the question.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Okay, so the next question, I think this is you again, Max. It looks like the plan sets out a single vision and set of proposed sites and policies. Are alternative options for any of these set out anywhere so we can understand what decisions have been made?
Yes, so I think I mentioned this actually a little bit in the previous Q&A, didn't I? Because obviously one of the processes we've had to go through to sort of like select the kind of preferred strategy and the preferred approach that we're taking is to actually do comparison of the different reasonable alternatives that we've assessed in arriving at sort of what our preferred development strategy is. So I think the strategy topic paper, but also there are various documents within the evidence base that can help to show the process we've been through to arrive at the preferred strategy. I think also possibly, and you may wish to say a little bit about this, Terry, but we also have the HELAR, don't we, as well, which sets out sort of the decisions, the HELAR report, which sets out the decisions we've taken on the suitability of individual sites, and how those translate through into the local plan.
I think
Yeah,
that kind of fits perhaps with the next question, Terry. So you might want to fold that in, perhaps. So should I ask it? Does the plan specify proposed housing densities and how these compare to other developments in Cambridge over the last 50 years, e.g. Orchard Park, Eddington, Darwin Green?
Thank you. Yes, that's a really interesting question. So the policies, the site allocations themselves don't set minimum densities or maximum densities for any of the emerging sites. Essentially, we're trying to go with a kind of criteria-based approach. So we do have a density policy within the Great Places chapter. So that's definitely worth having a look at. So it sets out that, new development must be of an appropriate density that reflects kind of local character, must make sure there's, it doesn't result in things like overdevelopment and all of those sorts of things. We have said, however, that it may be appropriate to put higher density development in kind of the most accessible locations. So, for example, close to transport interchanges, in areas that are well served by services, facilities, jobs, etc. We are going to do a little bit more work in the run up to the next round of consultation later this year to see if we could actually identify where those places might be based on kind of accessibility to services, facilities and public transport. For those of you that are interested in things like density and building heights and things like that as well, we have actually undertaken a skyline and tall building strategy, because through that work we've identified where the tallest buildings are in Cambridge and in some of the large assessments across South Cambridgeshire. We've looked at whether the strategic viewpoints within the city are still correct and up to date, and we've made some proposed revisions to those. So when planning applications come in, we can then determine where, the impacts that they have on those strategic viewpoints. So, for example, from the Gog-Magogs, Limekiln Road, etc. So it's a really interesting read for those of you that are interested in that. But we haven't actually set out any sort of minimum or maximum densities within the site allocations themselves.
Thanks, Terry. I think this next one is Stuart's. So in policy CCRE, renewable energy projects and infrastructure, it states that proposals must seek to avoid, minimise and mitigate adverse impacts during construction and operation wherever possible. However, it also states that where any localised adverse impacts remain, these will be considered against the wider sustainability benefits of the proposal. Is there a risk here that the climate emergency will be invoked by developers in an attempt to dismiss other concerns?
Thanks, Heather. So yeah, good question. I guess it's a fairly generic answer in a sense, in that all planning decisions are in some part a matter of judgment, and they're about weighing in the planning balance the varying and competing issues. Some policies are more precise and say this is the answer and you must do it, and so that's very clear. Some parts of this policy and other policies are more judgment based. So I think there will inevitably remain an element of judgment. If you think we should try and revise this policy, then please do suggest how we should do it.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think this is you again, Stuart. We support your aim to limit commuting into the area, but there has been a history of people commuting from here to London. Grange Farm is in a prime position for this. Have you any views on how that could be managed?
Thanks, really interesting question. So I think there's a few bits to this. So most of the housing, more than half the housing there will likely be market housing, and we can't tie that in a precise way. We provide for the building of the house and they go there, and people will choose where they work and where they live. Social rented affordable housing with the affordable housing provision can be tied in the sense that people go on the housing needs list and they have to have a local connection as a particular point. A different example of a different development at Welcome is that it was precisely about tying the homes to the jobs there. But I guess the key point about Grange Farm is it's located right next to an existing and growing significant base of employment. So you can walk to Granta Park, you can cycle to Babraham, you'll be able to get on the bus to CBC. So the logic of putting it there is that it's close to employment and attractive to people working in those locations.
Right. Okay. So how will the plan assess the need for an adequacy of outdoor recreational facilities, including for the dog population? Note 30% plus of households have a dog. Who wants to answer that one?
I'll have a go at that one. So yeah, good question. So I think there's two parts to it. So we are completing a sports and recreation study to understand kind of more formal uses of space and the adequacy of that, and that will inform the later stages of the infrastructure plan that Max talked of. We have also done studies about green spaces, so more informal space for parks and allotments, and wider, bigger spaces as well. And so together they essentially inform an understanding of what we have and what is needed in terms of standards for what's needed to be provided to meet those additional developments. The dog issue has come up in the green spaces issue. It's not an easy one to address, but it's worth raising and exploring the impacts and whether it can be mitigated. But that's the area in which it's been addressed.
Thank you, Stuart. I think there was one question I missed, and this was, how does the Greater Cambridge local plan fit in with the plans for local government reorganisation for a unitary authority? One of the options is for South Cambs and City Council to unite, which would fit in with this draft. But if the option includes East Cambridgeshire District Council, then development site availability may change. I think it's important to perhaps understand that our emerging local plan has already been agreed to be a joint local plan, and that was agreed many years ago now, as outlined previously or earlier. So this local plan will continue on its trajectory as a joint local plan with South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridge City Council, and it will go through Reg 19 status and then through examination. In respect of the LGR, we're still to understand what that will look like moving forward. We do know that there are a number of options as have been outlined that have been proposed by various councils in the region, and I think we understand that probably around March time we will understand what that will look like, and there will be changes to be made. But our understanding is the local plans will remain as valid until such point as the LGR, new organisations come together and agree what to do moving forward. Okay.
Is it perhaps worth just saying, Heather, I guess it's not unheard of, even so West Suffolk, adjacent to Greater Cambridge, plans get adopted and then council's structures change and those plans stay there until a new plan is created. So it's not a completely new situation. It can be applied until a new plan comes along. Yeah,
really helpful. Thank you, Stuart, just to add that on. I think we've come to all of the questions, and we are just about on time, so that's really helpful. So just want to say thank you again for attending, and thank you for your questions. They were very interesting, and some new questions there, which is great. And as noted at the start, you will be able to view all of the previous webinars, the 4 that were outlined and this one, on our website. Please do make sure you respond to the consultation as well via our consultation web pages, and the deadline for that is the 30th of January. I think it's really important that we hear from you, so please do put your comments in. So once again, just can I thank everyone for attending and thank officers for their presentation tonight, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.